Battle and a pastor's act of kindness, that and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each and every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, Dr. Michael Brown joins us to talk about the Jezebel spirit. What is it, and what does the Bible really say about it? Let's welcome him to Newsmakers. Well, Dr. Brown, as always, you have really interesting commentary on this most recent controversy to rock the church, the Mark Driscoll Jezebel controversy. And, I want to get into not so much the controversy itself, but I do have a couple of questions for you, but mainly Jezebel, because the Jezebel spirit was one of the things that came up in this story with Mark Driscoll mentioning that Jezebel spirit. And you wrote a book a couple of years back called Jezebel's War with America, the plot to destroy our country and what we can do to turn the tide. So let's start with this general question. For those who don't know, who was Jezebel?
So Jezebel is arguably the most wicked woman in the Bible. She was a Phoenician princess and an ardent worshiper of Baal. She married King Ahab, and together they helped bring Israel down into deep idolatry. And of course, she had a great battle with the prophet Elijah. So she's associated with idolatry. She is associated with being seductive, with witchcraft. And the thing that people often refer to when they think of Jezebel and Ahab, or they'll say he's kind of an Ahab, meaning that she seemed to be very domineering, that she was the one that was guiding and driving some of the wickedness that took place, and that he didn't sufficiently resist it, just went along with it. And when we refer to Jezebel's spirit, the reason that we come up with the idea is that she's mentioned again in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation. And Jesus says to the church in Thyatira, you tolerate that woman called Jezebel, who claims to be a prophetess. Was it actually her name, Jezebel, or was that just the name given because she led people into sexual immorality and worship of idols? So similar to the Jezebel in the Old Testament. So when we refer to a Jezebel spirit, what we mean is the same demonic powers that operated through her, seductive, leading into idolatry, emasculating, etc. Those same demonic powers operating today. And that's what Jezebel's War with America was about, to say, just look at this. Look at these things that are happening, from radical feminism to abortion, because in the ancient world, idols are often associated with child sacrifice, to porn and seduction, to the emasculating of men, etc. Put these things together. It's Jezebelic.
Yeah. And, looking at America, as you said, and that's what you did in that book, juxtaposing who she was and the spirits working through her and what we're seeing happen today. Were you shocked to see Jezebel sort of thrown out in the midst of this most recent, conversation with Mark Driscoll, or were you not shocked? I mean, you were one of the first people to sort of respond to it and do a write-up on it, giving your perspective.
Actually, I didn't even pay much attention to that part of it. I haven't followed Mark Driscoll's ministry or restoration or what he had written or said about it. It was more the larger controversy of the performance that was at the men's conference and then how it was handled. And I just had so many different people asking me about it, including leaders, the day everything surfaced. I thought I should reply to it. So the biggest controversies that I looked at were the performance itself, and then how it was handled by Mark Driscoll and then by Pastor John Liddell, whom I don't know either, only heard good things about it within the Assemblies of God. But how it was handled, what was going on, what we could learn from it. And to me, that was the big thing. What are the edifying takeaways? I don't want to get caught up in the gossip column here, but what's our righteous response?
Now, I do want to ask you one question about this Mark Driscoll controversy. When it comes to the church, right? And I'm saying, Big C church, when these sorts of events are going on, one of the questions that has come up, and it's been focused a little bit less on, which is interesting, does the church need to have these big monster truck, rallies as part of these events, the sword swallowers? I mean, this was actually, I'm not going to lie, to me, And a lot of people were like, what's wrong with you? You haven't been around this? And I honestly haven't been. I've gone to smaller churches. I've mostly my whole life, I've never gone to a men's conference where there was a monster truck. So it was interesting to me that this was such a common practice at so many men's conferences. I'm curious, spiritually, what you think about that. Is that stuff needed? Is it not?
Let me make a very direct statement first and then a qualifier after. The direct statement is, when God really moves, you don't need any of that stuff, and you won't have any of that stuff. And there's no reason to get people all worked up in the flesh if the goal is now to bring them into the things of the Spirit. And I've spoken at some of the finest mega churches around the world and never encountered anything like that. So that is my fundamental statement. I want to say one other thing, though. There are settings, you think of a Billy Graham rally many years ago, right? And they would have, here's a famous gospel singer. Here's an actor who's a Christian, and he's going to testify, right? You had the power team years ago, these muscle guys, and they do these feats of strength and then share the gospel, right? So these were just ways, especially bringing guys in together. And if your purpose is outreach and bringing in a crowd, so you got some baseball player who's a believer who's going to testify, or you're going to do some seminar, I don't know, some country thing with fishing, and now afterwards, now you're going to
comedians, Christian comedians. That's another one. A lot of comedians come into churches.
I'm not sitting here to condemn or to say it's wrong-hearted or carnal in general. Without a doubt, though, they needed to have vetted what they were doing and not have this gentleman in. We pray that he'll really come to know the Lord. That's number one. Number two, you need to have the sense that there's certain things that are appropriate and certain things that aren't appropriate in public settings. If you used to be a male go-go dancer in gay nightclubs and other things and taking off most of your clothes and dancing sensually, well, if you do come to faith, the one thing you're not going to do is take your shirt off and do some performance like that and use a pole. So, obviously he needs to come to the Lord and be born again. That's what we should pray for. But that is just so out of line. And thankfully, the pastor apologized, just never should have happened, and is grieved over the division. So let's move on from there. And to me, the big thing is to say, okay, we just need God. We need God to come and move. And when we encounter him, everything changes. And we won't even, the monster truck could be sitting outside. We'll never drive it in because people will be on their faces weeping and repenting.
Well, as always, really appreciated your time today. Looking forward to talking again very soon.
Yes, sir.
If you want to know more about that topic, you can grab copies of Brown's book, Jezebel's War with America, for more on that topic. We'll be back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Our next guest is Corey DeAngelis. He's an education activist and an advocate who is on a mission to empower parents and to solidify school choice across America. He's out with a new book. It's called The Parent Revolution: Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. Let's welcome him to Newsmakers. You have a new book coming out, The Parent Revolution: Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. A very interesting title on that front. And we're going to get into the book. But before we do, you've been on the forefront of this parental rights and education battle. What was it that initially led you into this area of interest?
Yeah, I actually got into this policy area as a researcher. I did my PhD in education policy at the University of Arkansas. So I'm a doctor, but I'm not a real doctor. I'm more like a Jill Biden doctor. I can help.
Hey, you earned it. Listen, you earned it.
I went through it. Yeah. So, but my first study in that program looked at the effects of the Milwaukee Private School Choice Initiative on a long-term outcome that's really important, that's understudied, which is whether the kids became involved in the criminal justice system as adults. And we found large effects on reducing crime as a result of getting to go to a school that works best for your kid. Lo and behold, surprise, surprise, families get to choose a school that is aligned with their values, that isn't involved in drugs and bullying and violence. Their kids less likely to be involved in crime later on in life. So really looking at these non-academic outcomes were really important to me, improving students' mental health, creating better citizens. And the overwhelming preponderance of the evidence shows more choice, better civic outcomes, better long-term outcomes, and better academic outcomes as well. It's a win-win solution. The public schools benefit from competition. The kids, it's a rising tide that lifts all boats for both sectors. And you should also be able to use that money for homeschooling if that's the best fit for your child.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of pushback on, using the money or getting a credit and putting it towards religious schools. Of course, you'll hear the separation of church and state. You'll hear these arguments that are made. But the reality is people are paying school taxes, all over this country in different communities, and they pay different amounts based on where they live. Why do you think there is such a pushback on, and this is a very loaded question because it's multiple part, both school choice and then what we just discussed there, the money being maybe given to go to a private school, for instance?
Well, these people are freaking hypocrites. The same people who argue against school choice because of the so-called separation of church and state. By the way, the words separation of church and state are not in the U.S. Constitution. They're talking about a state-established religion. School choice, you getting to pick your school for your child that aligns with your values, that does not establish a state religion. So this is not rocket science here. But those same people that argue against school choice for this reason, they have no problem with Medicaid vouchers that can be used at religiously affiliated hospitals. You don't have to take your Medicaid dollars to a government-assigned hospital. You don't have to take your Head Start pre-K dollars to a government-assigned pre-K. The Democrats who support these programs, these programs allow you to take pre-K dollars to a religious pre-K provider. Same thing with higher education, with the Pell Grant. These are taxpayer dollars that can be used at religious universities if you want. The funding follows the decision of the family or the student. I'm just arguing we should apply that same logic to the in-between years of K through 12 education. And it's not a separation of state and church and state issue at all, or it does not violate the Establishment Clause, because parents and students and families, they are the primary decision makers. They are the ones who are directly benefiting from the funding. It's their money. They get to take it to the school that's public, private, religious, or otherwise of their choice. I think the difference there is that when it comes to K through 12 education, there's an entrenched special interest. The teachers union and the superintendents union, some people just don't like religion, and they see the school system as a way to shape the rest of society. I mean, the anti-religious radical left liberals that control the school system, they don't have to have their own kids. They can basically just use the school system for 7 hours a day for 13 years of children's lives, their most impressionable years, to shape, to inculcate their worldview in the classroom. And that's why parents have launched a revolution over the past few years. We saw that the teachers unions fought to keep the schools closed. Their plan worked in the short run. They got $190 billion in so-called COVID relief since March of 2020, but their plan quickly backfired because parents, through remote learning, which, look, we really should have just called it remotely learning. Not a lot of learning was going on, but families got to see something was going on that was not just the basics. The schools were indoctrinating as opposed to educating. And that will do more to mobilize a parent than anything else. Look, Vodi Bakum said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans. Well, the good news is parents aren't surprised anymore.
Listen, I appreciate your time today. The book is The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. Thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Billy.
You can check out The Parent Revolution wherever books are sold. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we caught up with Pastor Ed Newton. He serves at Community Bible Church in San Antonio, Texas, and he was recently caught on a viral video stopping mid-sermon to embrace and speak with a homeless man. Let's welcome Newton to Newsmakers to share the powerful story behind that video. So you have been going viral over the past few days over an interaction that you had last month with a homeless man at your church I want to just ask you first, this is this moment for those who haven't seen it where you're on stage, you're giving your sermon, and somebody yells, Anthony, an expletive, from the audience. And I would imagine that's not something that happens every day, to pastors. What was going through your mind initially? And I had heard that it happened a number of times that morning, but when you heard that?
Yeah, the part that is missed because the video that went viral didn't include the first part of what actually happened. So any pastor could hear this and go, yeah, I know exactly what this feels like. You walk out on stage after the last song and you typically begin with an introduction. So glad you're here. You welcome the guest. But the moment I, like Billy, opened my mouth to go, to say something, there is profanity that shouted at me. And it was a compliment. I wear all black every day but I wear Jordans. And so I'm very not interesting to look at as a person. But my shoes stood out to Anthony, but I didn't know Anthony. And so Anthony yells out, cool blank shoes. And so immediately it just checks me. And I'm like, hey, what's your name? And he goes, Anthony. And I was like, well, cool, man. Glad you're here. Typically don't get greeted like that. Glad you're in the room. And just moved on. And then got into the bulk of the message because we were actually preaching through our core values. And the core value of that weekend was celebrate life change. We just got out of baptism, just baptized like over 200 people. And we celebrate, like we actually have like a pep rally when people get baptized. And we're talking about lost found party, which is the story of the prodigal, the lost coin, lost sheep. And I'm talking about the Pharisees that are real critical of Jesus. And that's the part where you pick up on the video where Anthony yells out again and he goes, as I'm talking about the Pharisees, he goes, that's blank, blank. And
and again, you're in this position. You're in a position I would imagine is a little awkward in the moment because you've got kids in the room, probably families in the room, people who are not used to this, and you have to make a decision at that moment of what you're going to do. I don't want to speak for you, but as I'm watching it, I'm thinking this.
No, Billy, you're right on. And truth be told, his statement about the Pharisees was pretty accurate in what he said, that they were, whatever. And I think for me, I wanted to go, no, you're exactly right. Just how you said it was a little off, but I don't know. I'm a student pastor. I've been a student pastor for a long time, and I've just been a senior pastor for 8 years. And for anybody that's watching that's a student pastor, there's nothing that you've not seen. And for me, all I knew to do in that moment was to go, hey, listen, if we're one-on-one, I'm not correcting you. But because we got little ears in the room, I had to somewhat kind of just say, hey, you're welcome here. You're loved here. And then when he yelled out after that, this guy saved my life, then I'm trying to figure out, and this is the part, Billy, that I did not know till a week later, because I don't go back and watch services. Somebody walked up to me, Billy, and goes, how did you know he was homeless? Because he didn't look homeless. He was shaved, had a mustache. I said, what do you mean? They were like, Ed, you went from, he said that, and then you looked right at him and said, are you homeless? And I was like, no, I didn't do that. They're like, no, Ed, you were really direct with that guy.
Wow.
And I didn't know I did it. I really honestly did not know that I changed the gear without a clutch and just went from here to here. And when I said, are you homeless? That's when he looked at Michael and went, this dude saved my life. So
I mean,
crazy.
and at that moment, it is crazy. I mean, I got chills as you were saying that, because you're standing there and you're in front of all these people in your church and you have this moment, and it was this gentle rebuke. The way you did it was so kind, and he responded really well to it. Mm-hmm. But there's a moment then where you can see your gears are turning and you're thinking, and I imagine you're maybe even praying in those moments. You then invite him, Anthony, and Michael, the man who he said saved his life, up to the stage with you. You sit down on the stage, they come up. What was it that motivated that? Because that's also a big risk in that moment because you don't know how that conversation's going to go.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I invited Michael up, who is a 24-year-old African-American financial analyst, by the way, hero of the story. That's kind of, I find out in that moment, because I didn't know Michael prior, that's come up through our college ministry. And I invited Michael up. I felt in my heart, which, first of all, that's not the first time I've invited people. Like, I just felt that what they had to say to give testimony. I do a lot of that. Like, hey, brother, why don't you come say a word? Tell us what's going on. But it typically doesn't become the sermon. It becomes like a 60-second, 90-second, 2-minute testimony. But I knew at that moment there was something going on with, I wanted Michael to be the, I knew at that moment Michael was preaching the sermon. But I didn't know that Michael came to the 8 o'clock service and the 10 o'clock, because we have 5 services, one on Saturday at 5, 4 on Sunday, 8, 10, 12, 2. He came to the 8, 10, heard the message, and left the 10 o'clock service and bought somewhat of a breakfast meal to give to a homeless person. And when he went to go give it to her, she wasn't there. And then he saw Anthony. And he walks up to Anthony, and Anthony goes, "Where are you coming from?" And Michael goes, "I just came from church." And then that's where Anthony invites himself to go to church with Michael.
I don't want to take any more of your time. This has been incredible. I want to have you back again, though, because there's a lot more to dig into on your story. And I just appreciate, we'll have to do an update on Anthony as well and see where things go as he goes through rehab. Appreciate your time today.
No, thank you, man. I think we all live by this principle. I know you do as well, Billy. You do for one what you hope you could do for all. And that's Jesus. Leave the 99. Go after the one.
Please continue to pray for Anthony and Community Bible Church. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel for the full interviews you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our new daily Newsmakers podcast. It's Monday through Friday, and we feature one full interview every single day. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. As for this show, we'll see you again next week.